Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Financial Transformation Live. So, myself and Sophie, who is our producer here at Financial Transformation Live, we're actually trialing a new system. So, I apologize in advance for any technical difficulties. Hopefully, the content will be worth pursuing with us. But today, we're going to talk all about how do you assess your current finance systems. Okay, so very often we don't take the opportunity to sit down and think about what we're doing with our systems. And so this is a great opportunity. And I'm going to talk to you about how we approach it as consultants. I'm trying to distill, the 10 or 12 years I've had of doing this with our customers into something you can practically use, right? So feedback is always welcome. If you're watching this live, say hello, right? Because part of what we're trying to do here is build a community of transforming finance people. I was about to call you all Transformers, but I'm not sure that is the right terminology to use. I am a bit of a sci-fi geek, as you may tell. So for those of you who have never watched a Financial Transformation Live session, firstly, welcome. It's wonderful to have you with us. Please do say if this is your first, second, third time, pop it in the chat. It's always interesting to understand where people have come from and what they're doing. So firstly, welcome. It's amazing to have you with us, and I'm hoping you're going to join us again for the next one. So we'll talk a little bit about the next session at the end of this one. So I am Hannah Munro. I am Managing Director and Transformation Lead here at ITAS. So I lead our transformation division, and we've worked with Sage software in particular for a very long time. And our specialties are Sage 50, Sage 200 and Sage Intact. And particularly 200 and Intact is where most of our customers live. So we do a lot of obviously a lot of implementations, but actually a big piece of the work that we do is actually helping people that are already on Sage maximize their usage. So I thought this was a really great session for us to put together. And as much because I do feel that even once people go live with the system, even if it's been implemented to a really high standard, there is always things you can do to make it better. And people, after the first implementation, they may sit back and go, oof, we've done that right, job's done. And actually software, particularly finance operations, should be an ongoing review and development piece. So this is a great line in the sand to do. I'm not saying you should do it every month or even every quarter, right? But you should have a strategy that covers a 12 to 36 month period around your systems and your processes. So this is the first step in putting that strategy together, is understanding your current state of play. So, and I bring this just to put this session into context, is that when people go on to and do transformation, only 30% of projects deliver results, right? So people ask me, why do I do these sessions? Why are you investing so much effort? And I think the reality is that unless people like myself as consultants share this knowledge and bring it into the mainstream, we're not going to have the kind of results that we want to see. And it is critical for us to make this transition, because otherwise finance cannot do the job that the business needs it to do, which is the more strategic, the more analytical side of finance. And so that's what we're focused on. Okay, so today's session, really quickly, we are going to go through a framework for reviewing your current system. So what are the steps that you should go through? I'm going to talk about some quick wins, right? Because people always say, well, what things should I quickly look at now in order to make my systems work, to get that feedback as well. So from my perspective, I very much want to go through some quick wins and things that I see a lot of. So that hopefully will give you a few things that you can go away, ask questions and think about. If there are other things that I feel that are specific, I will mention those as well. So, and I'm trying to make it product agnostic. So all of the sessions I run on Transformation Live are product agnostic. So they are applicable across pretty much every platform, not just Sage, and not a specific Sage as well. I am going to, at the end of the session, go through how to identify whether you need to invest in improving your current system versus switching to a new one. And there's a really simple strategy you can use to start making that decision. And I'll talk to you about how you can approach it as well. And I've got shed loads of content to share with you in today's session. So I've got templates, I've got resources that you can access, some of it, other and older financial transformation lives. So apologies if I'm referencing lots of links. Sophie is standing by with all of these links will be going into the comments. So if I've missed something, if you can't find something, just ask or DM me, right? Because we have so much stuff to share with you today. Okay, so again, as we go through, ask your questions. I am trying to keep an eye. Sophie will remind me if I miss anything. So please, I want this session to be interactive. And also, to be very honest, it's lovely to know if people are actually listening live, because I do want, and do try to treat these sessions as if we are live and in person as well. So maybe that's the next step. Love to hear if you would fancy an in-person version of Financial Transformation Live, perhaps a morning or afternoon where we combine a few sessions and do a full learning day. So okay, so onto the rest of the presentation. So let's go. So the first thing is, here is how you should approach assessing your current systems. And I'm going to talk you through each of these steps individually, but just as a top level. So first, you need to gather independent feedback from users on how the system is working, what it's doing. Then you go and you collate and identify trends, right? So you want to kind of see if there's any patterns to the feedback and understand where that's coming from. Then you want to go through and review your documented processes, okay? And for those of you that haven't done this and haven't got processes documented, that's another conversation we'll pick up. I always recommend an Excel audit, right? Regardless of how good you think your system is and how well established and how long you've had it, there's always something in an Excel audit. So it's my go-to if I don't quite know how to approach, and it just uncovers so much. We'll talk about using the month-end timeline mapping technique that I've shown you on a couple of other sessions. And then we'll talk about how you can compare to best practice and how can you understand what best practice is. And then you need to go through, identify, document, and prioritize solutions and present that to the wider organization. So those are the steps we're going to go through today. Again, questions are open. Tell us if you have any, and as we go through, I will try and do my very best to keep an eye on the comments that are coming through. Okay, so let's go on to the first piece, which is gathering independent feedback. So if any of you actually listen to the podcast, and if you those that don't know, we run a weekly podcast called CFO 4.0. You can see that behind me, and we publish these financial transformation sessions on that. But I had a cracking conversation with John Gruder, who is he is head of the organisational behaviour division over in Maynooth University. And so we're just talking about how you gather feedback from a team feedback perspective. And what's really interesting is that the way that he says you should approach team feedback is very similar to why I approach getting independent system feedback in this way. So one of the things that can happen quite easily if you're not careful when you're gathering feedback is that it becomes influenced by others around you, right? So or the people that you're trying to gather feedback from, and that is challenging when you're trying to get a really clear picture of what's going on. So one of the things I often say to people is actually take a step back, and when you're gathering feedback, ask for people to do the work independently and bring it in, right? Because what that stops is a lot of things. It stops one person taking charge of the conversation. It also stops individuals influencing people's view and feelings around something, okay? So if you want an honest feedback on what is happening, then you do need to make sure that your feedback is gathered independently. So there's a couple of ways you can do that. You could theoretically, you could sit down with people and have conversations. That's one way of doing it. You can get them to write down their thoughts and their pieces. That's my preference, and give them time to work through a series of questions. Or you could do quizzes and online bits and pieces. And I'll talk to you a bit about that in a second. But fundamentally, the bit you need to understand is what is working well. Yeah, so what do they like about the current system? What do they think is working great with the processes? What is not? Okay, so where are the challenges? Where are the bottlenecks in the processes? And where are the stoppers, and where are they processing things individually as well? What do you spend most of your time doing is a really interesting question, because then you can start to focus your attention on what's happening there. And are there any high volume tasks where you're doing a lot of them repetitively? Or are there any tasks where it's particularly complex and needs that's very different depending on scenarios, for instance? Again, we're just trying to understand what's working, what's not. And one big question is, what can we automate? So it may be that individuals don't understand what they can automate, and that's absolutely fine. That's part of the process we're going in. But very often, especially those that are technically savvy, they will have ideas and thoughts either on systems they've used before, or other areas, maybe something they've read or something they've been meaning to do for ages, just haven't managed to dedicate the time. So that's you want to get all of those ideas out, and what this be a system that's owned by its users. So those fundamentally are the sorts of things you should ask. So fundamentally, if you do nothing else, ask them to document their thoughts on those. Everyone that uses the system, ask them to document their thoughts on that. Now you can take this a bit of a step further. So one of the things that the team and I are working on at the moment is about how do we give people a tool that they can use to actually go through the system. So if you are using Sage 50, Sage 200 or Sage Intact, it would be well worth registering you in test so that we can talk about and basically send you the link to the Sage Systems feedback solution that we're putting together. So it's basically an online quiz where you can get your users to go online, pop in their details, pop in your details, answer some questions that are really specific. So this is something that we've got here. So some example, I just talked about invoicing, but things like, do you manually choose your invoice layouts, or are they automatically selected? Do you have and then we can understand and talk about, well, why do you have to manually select it? How can we automate the selection? If we talked about, are you manually entering invoices? Well, if so, why is that? Is that applicable to all of those invoices? Is that applicable to some? So we've basically put together a series of system agnosticisms, a series of questions for each team, or each functional area, I should say, of the system, to just prompt some questions and feedback. Now, I'm actually hoping this will be applicable to non-Sage users as well, because some of it isn't really specific, it's just general. So if you would like to have access to that, DM me, send me a message, put a comment saying me please, and particularly around the systems feedback, because we've got loads of content to share with you, and we will collate that and we will get that sent through over the next sort of few weeks, because like I said, it's in its early stages, so the more interest we get, the more people asking, the more it gets prioritized. It's just how we work on this, on the Transformation Live pieces. Okay, so but you'll notice there's a big difference. There's that first wave of like, how do you find your system working, what's working well, what's not. It's really generic, and we're looking for them to give us feedback, and that's how I start all of my sessions when I'm doing an assessment. And then the second wave of feedback is about understanding what are the pinch points in their particular processes, where are they spending time doing selections and manual entry, so that we can then pick out and where to automate. Okay, so the next stage is is actually to collate and gather that feedback, right, and put it into one, and then you should see some patterns, right? You should see some commonalities, particularly from members in the same team, and if they are doing the same role. If they aren't, then you might need to do some further investigation, right? So very often, and I've just realized I've skipped ahead a slide, and very often it could be that somebody has not been trained how to use the system well. So that's a really quick win. You can do some side-by-side coaching with those two individuals, put them together, and just make sure that people are using the system in the same way, because very often that can happen. And again, that doesn't necessarily require any cost, but it's a great way to get things going. Okay, so gather your independent feedback, allow everybody to fill it out without influence from others within the group or within the user base. And then you can do that at a top level, so asking for ideas for feedback for feeling. And then you can ask specific questions that will allow you to guide and understand where to focus your investigations. Okay, so once we've collated the feedback, we've identified trends, we then need to focus our investigation and just basically dig into things a bit more. So the next piece I will always ask people is, do you have copies of your processes? So, and I feel like I'm banging the drum for documenting processes in finance. And I literally had a customer this week I was speaking to about it. And it's something that we all know we need to do, but finding the time to actually get it done is hard. But it is important because it really does identify and open up a world of conversation about how things are working. Okay. So whilst I'm not saying you have to do this for every system review, especially if you're going to follow all of the steps in this process, we'll talk about those later. But at some point you might need some advice on how your system's working from somebody that knows, like a consultant or like a software specific consultant. You can spend an awful lot of time explaining to them what your processes are, or they can just look at your process maps and tell you whether you're following best practice. So my one thing to keep your costs down, and also there's so many reasons to process map, but keeping costs down, getting consistency, and and finding ways to streamline your processes all start with mapping them out. Now, this is why we did a session specifically on this. So I'm not going to repeat that session for those of you that have watched it, but for those of you that haven't, so if you could pop the link in, this is a really important one, right? So we've actually got 2 on process mapping. We've got this one, which is the getting started, and then we've got the second one, which is the re-engineering your finance processes, about how you redesign them. Okay, so you don't have to do both right now. Just if you haven't got your processes mapped, share that link with somebody in your team and just get them onto the bandwagon. We talk about tools, we talk about how you do it, we talk about how you can run workshops, do's and don'ts. It's full of great content. So that's one of the ones I am very proud of. So please do jump on and have a look at that one. Okay, so next step is review your documented processes. The step after that is reviewing your Excel audit. So again, every customer I speak to, I just have this as standard now because I have just seen so many benefits from doing this, right? So it's super simple, sometimes scary for individuals within that team, particularly if they've got a lot, but we talk about an Excel amnesty. Doesn't matter, just get it all out, we can fix it later. So you're just going through, you're putting together the spreadsheet name, the type, what it does, why you have it, who looks after it, where it's located, how often you use it, how much time you spend on it, and then also the priority piece around it. Okay, so it's a really great basis because it will drive a lot of attention. There's loads of stats I've shared with you guys previously about how if you have lots of spreadsheets, your month end will be longer. Studies have shown it. You are likely to have more risk in your finance processes. So it's a really good basis for a conversation. And again, if you're storing lots of data in spreadsheets, it tends to slow down processes. There often tends to be things in spreadsheets that could be done in a system, but either somebody's not had the time to figure it out, or they don't know it can be done. So both of those things are really valuable for when you're doing the best practice review. Okay, and last but not least, review month-end timeline. The reason I like to review month-end timelines is the time it takes us to do month-end is a brilliant KPI for finance teams, right? It allows us to set ourselves a benchmark. And so given that, for me, one of the key things about prioritization and how much time we invest should be understanding what is the impact in terms of one of our KPIs as a finance team. So it allows us to identify 2 things, and what we should be looking for in our month-end timeline mapping is, firstly, what are the things that are really pushing our timeline mapping out, right? So what things are pushing our month-end out, all right? And then there's 2 questions you need to ask: is 1, can I take less time to do it? So can I shrink the time I'm spending doing it? And secondly, can I do it earlier? Right? So a classic example of that is prepayments, right? So when you enter a purchase invoice, you then might record it into a spreadsheet, and then at the end of the month, you'll pull that spreadsheet out and maybe do a bit of recce and then post that as a journal, right? So you can There's a couple of ways you can approach that. Is one, you can shrink the time it takes you to do that, so you can just do prepayments in the system. Secondly, you could do it earlier, and that you could actually do your prepayments at the point you enter your invoice. Okay, so very basic example. You can use that example across lots. There's another one, things like entering supplier invoices. A lot of people will have 3 or 4 days of entering purchase invoices after they close month end. Those that have invested in an OCR system, for instance, will have it constantly working. So they've only got like a day of collecting those invoices, and so it can be done a lot earlier. So supplier invoices can go in earlier. Second thing they can do is they can do it faster. So machines can process invoices a lot faster than humans can, so they can get it into the systems better. So then we've got more time to do the checking, the reconciliation, the authorization chasing, all of those things that might hit our month end. So 2 examples of can I do it earlier and can I do it quicker? And they're really great questions to ask around your common processes. Again, points for conversation. Okay, so then we get on to like comparing to best practice. And I think if you have a team that has always, particularly for those that have teams that have always worked in one place or have been with you a long time, this is where you really need to get some outside feedback, is my personal opinion. But for those of you that have got a really mixed team, you've had some new people come in, some really technically savvy individuals, then there's lots of things that you can do to understand best practice. So I'm just going to take you through a couple of things. So the first thing is to watch online demos of your software. So if you were going out to purchase any software, you would look at how, watch videos, you'd try and understand demos and see how it's being used and how it can impact your organization. If you have had your system for a particularly long time, it is very likely that you haven't potentially not kept up with the latest releases, that you're maybe unaware of what it can do. So one of the first things I say to people is just go and look at why people buy it now. What are the things that it can do that you maybe didn't know it could? And let's get some inspiration flowing within our team as to how wonderful this platform is. Okay, so that's the first thing. So watch online demos, see what the system could do and why people buy it. Because in demos, they will show you the really exciting stuff normally, right? They'll show you a bit of the basic stuff, but it tends to be the stuff around automation, around analytics, all those things that we're wanting to achieve with our current system. So it's a really good way to just focus on those elements. Okay, so that's number one, my one tip, go out, look at online demos. The second piece to do is go and read help guides, right? So, or user manuals. And most systems will come with them. They'll either have a knowledge base or, for instance, we as a partner have shed loads of process help guides, okay? So, and they will normally talk you through the standard way to do things that most customers would use. And if you aren't following that standard, that's a bit of a flag and go, well, why aren't we? What is it about us that makes us so unique we can't follow the system's standard processes? And then you can ask questions about, well, why aren't we able to? Are those scenarios valid? Are there things we need to change outside of finance or earlier on in the process to allow us to do that? So there's something there. Consulting with a technical product expert, right? So people are always worried about this because they're worried it's going to be costly to do, right? And my argument to that is that if you prepare well, if you have done a full, you've asked questionnaires, you've gotten feedback from your team, you've done an Excel audit, you documented it, you've documented your processes, that individual should be able to come in and, within a couple of hours or a day, be able to give you some good input and advice. Now, they may look at that and go, oh my gosh, there is so much here we need to talk about that I can't teach you everything. And I think that's one thing just to go through is that an audit is not fixing the problem. An audit is helping you identify answers to your problems so that you can decide which answers you want to move forwards with. So, and I have a template, again, I will share with you about what is the output from the audits that we do. So you can just see the sorts of things that you should be looking for. But I think that's a really important piece, right? And in order to make that valuable and to get the most out of your time, you need to make sure you have prepped. A lot of people will just go in and start it with a meeting with, tell this consultant everything that's not great with the system, okay? But actually there's, like I said, if you follow this step and at the end of it, do the audit, you're going to get a lot more value out of it. And I wish, I ask a lot of people to do Excel audits. I ask them for their processes, all those kind of things. And it's just, it amazes me that people haven't got or done these things, but that's the point, right? It's why I'm here. It's why so many people are joining and listening to our sessions, is because we are just sharing this knowledge and ability. So the reason to do it is not because we don't want to do it with you, because we learn lots when we're doing it, but it just takes us longer and it incurs costs for you as an organization. So if you can give us the prep, you can do this work behind the scenes, and actually you get a lot more value out of our services. So something that I've been talking to our account managers about how we do this with our clients on an ongoing basis, how we get them to, being shining stars that they are. So, okay, so talking with technical or product experts. Next thing is to speak to existing team members. So the first thing I ask you to do is go out and go, right, what do you think we should improve to your team and your users? So within most organizations, people have worked somewhere else, and they may have liked something about how that organization works. They may not have, so that's where you get the feedback. But it's really important that you speak to individuals, say, well, that previous workplace you worked at, what did they do well? Were there any processes that worked better? Why was that? And just using the knowledge that your team have to drive what you're doing. And don't feel like you have to focus on those that have worked in a similar industry, okay? Because I'm a big believer that best practice actually goes across industry. There are best practices within industries for certain things, but actually certain industries do certain areas well. So speak to other organizations in those industries. So classic is manufacturing tend to be really good about understanding costs and procurement. Not always, right? There are some exceptions, but they do tend to be. Finance focused organizations, or professional services organizations, tend to be much better at understanding individuals' productivity and ROI and that side of things. So you could use a combination of those things to understand that. SaaS businesses tend to be really good at understanding customer profitability, renewal, customer satisfaction, because it drives a lot of their value. So each industry has its own core measures that they work with, but there's absolutely no reason that you as an organization shouldn't think about those things and think about how you measure and how you run processes and systems in ways that achieve the same goal. Okay. And last but not least, looking at benchmarks. So there's lots of studies, and I do try and share any interesting ones I come across around benchmarks, around things like time to month end, time spent processing, a number of heads, or salary bands for different types of industries, the amount spent on finance. So it's definitely worth looking at benchmarks. What I will say, you need to take those benchmarks into context, in that if you are particularly complex within your organization for whatever reason, and that is a USP for you as an organization, then those benchmarks may not be applicable. So don't hold them as a stick to beat your team with, but actually use them to go and ask good questions. It's just about information gathering. It's just about going, how do we compare? Where do we sit? And we have, and I'll try and get the link. I didn't ask Soph to prepare it, actually. I should have done thinking this through. We actually have some month-end benchmarks that we've shared. I think it was in the month-end Financial Transformation Live, actually. So what I can do is I can always share that after the show, or DM me if you want it, right? Just send me a message and I'll find the link for you. And that really does show you, it gives you basically example benchmarks that you can use to see how you as an organization are faring. Okay, so I think that's it for benchmarks. If anyone else has any other ideas as well, this very much is a community and sharing. So please do share if you have any other ideas, other places that you have found benchmarks or found them useful in particular, and then we will share those on here as well. Okay, so back on to benchmarks. Okay, so the next thing is resources. So I did warn you, we had loads of resources. So I feel very sorry for Meg and Soph, who are currently taking over the feed with lots of links. But, this is the point, is that this particular session is all about bringing together everything that we've already done. and giving you guys information. Don't worry, it's not going to be the last one, but I had to do things in a certain order to get to where we needed to be. So we have, and we've been doing these for years, right? We've been producing online guides for 200, for 50, and we've just literally launched a whole heap of them for Sage Intact as well. So, watch those. We're actually, I say watch, we are actually doing some videos to go alongside them. But you can download those. They are free. You just literally stick your email in and it will send you a copy of the guides. And we have loads of them on lots of different topics. So help yourself. They are, use and abuse them, right? I will also say that for those using Sage, there are help menus, both on Sage's website and embedded within the software for 200 and for Intact as well. So make sure you read those. Intact ones are particularly good, so definitely recommend. We also have coffee break demos on all of those on those different products as well. So shed loads on Intact in particular, quite a few on 200. We also have a number of different webinars on 200 as well, but I'm not going to overwhelm you with content. Just go onto our website, www.itestsolutions.co.uk, click on resources, and there's a whole suite of resources and webinars that we have for both existing and new users of 200 and Intact as well. So, okay, so once you've gone through that, right, you've understood best practice, you've looked at all those, you now need to decide on the answer, and you've brainstormed your answers to your problems. You now need to go through and actually put this into a format that you can use to then either identify and set aside budget. So one of the things that I produce when we go out and do audits is basically an audit template. It's a basic summary of what we found. And there's two things that's important. One is to document what you have found. So any issues or concerns, right? Understanding the impact of those issues and concerns, as in time and materials, right? And it's not just time, because that's the tendency, but it's important, right? So there is a piece about time, but risk as well. So, for instance, if you are doing authorizations outside of the system, there could be the risk that something could be authorized or paid prior to it being authorized, right? So understanding impact of that concern and also impact of change is important. And then what is the solution? So what is your proposed solution? Now that could be as generic as we need to go out and look at integrated OCR platforms or purchasing platforms. It could be you could be really specific and say we just need to add this field into here, okay? So going through that and identifying for each of the challenges and issues that you found, if there's solutions, if you've already implemented, because sometimes I do that, right? I'll go out and I'll do an audit, and as we're going through, I'll just go, they'll tell me something. So yeah, just fix that. Here it is, right? But record it because you've already started to solve the problems. And also, if there's more than one user in particular, then it's a great opportunity to make sure everybody is using the system in the same way and everyone is aware of the solution. Okay, you've already got value from your audit day once you've got a consultant in to do it. And then you need to prioritize. So is this a high priority? Is this something that we need to start work on and get in as quickly as we can? Or is this something that it's a nice to have, but it's not critically going to drive us forwards as a finance team? So you can go through and answer those questions, and then you need to think about what's the implementation time frame. So if particularly when we're looking at solutions, it may be there are some solutions to the problems that are going to take months to implement, right? There will be some things that can be implemented really quickly, but they may be a low priority. Yeah, so then I might pull them up a bit quicker. I might do them a bit quicker because they're quick to implement and easy to do, but they may not have a big impact in the long run, but you just sort of sneak them in. So understanding both prioritization and the timeframes to implement is really critical and should be part of your conversations when you're going through solutions. And of course, cost, right? So, and very often what's also interesting, and it's something I haven't quite figured out how to get across, in the best way, is that sometimes one solution can be the answer to multiple problems, right? And if that's the case, it should be a high priority, right? Because if it can tick lots of things off, and those individual areas may not be the most important, but as a collective, they become very important. So that's just something to bear in mind when you're reviewing solutions, is understanding the breadth of a solution. Is it going to impact just one of these problems, or is it going to have a wider impact across the board as well. Okay. So if you want to download that summary, we will be sharing this with you. It will be on the page, the financial transformation page, where you can download all of the content and the PowerPoint from today's session if you want to run it past your team or share with others. You know, this is what it's for. We'll also, once we've finished recording, we download the YouTube, we put it back up. We download the video, we put it back up so that people can actually access it on demand as well as live. So, anyway, so, okay, so identify improvements, prioritization, get a documented summary, right? Because we do have a tendency, once you start identifying things, it's really, really tempting to just jump in and start making changes, okay? Just one thing I would ask you to do is just take a step back, right? If you can implement small things as you go, do, but one, document them, and two, just make sure you've got all of this stuff documented, right? Because this is an amazing document to put before your executive team in terms of getting investment, but also getting buy-in to how you can use the system. Because because that's one of the most interesting things, especially when you do that user audit survey. You might get a lot of negative feedback, right? And I think it's almost like you have to, if you want to continue to use your current system, you do need to do a bit of a brand. You need to make sure that the brand of that system within your organization is seen well, right? And finance should be seen as the drivers behind it. So it should be seen as a system that allows you to get information out, that processes that work well for the whole business, not just finance, to deliver the result. So I think this is a really great way of not only collating and acknowledging the feedback you've had, but also raising the profile of the system internally. Because if it is raised internally, you and the people think, actually, it's a good system, we're getting a lot out of it, or we could get a lot out of it, you will get more investment for your improvement efforts. Okay, so and I think this personally is one of the problems that, or one of the reasons I should say, that most finance team systems, like finance systems, are normally the last piece that businesses invest in. Okay, unless somebody is good enough in finance at explaining why they need to invest in good systems and good back office. They will invest a lot in sales and marketing because people are very good at explaining the ROI. But we need to be better in finance explaining why invest in systems, both as in new systems, but also in improving our existing systems and improving the way we use it. Okay. Soapbox off. I'm sorry, guys. I do have a tendency to do that, and I apologize. So 10 quick wins that you can look at, right? So this is, if you're going through all of this and going tick, 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 then, hats off to you. I'm impressed, quite frankly, and we'd love to tell me if you have as well, right? Message me if you don't feel like engaging on the chat, or but I'd love to know how many of these you guys actually go, yes, we've got that. So, but these are common 10 quick wins. When I go into new systems, I just have conversations and they always pop up. So the first thing is bank feeds, right? So most systems now have bank feeds, and or they have automation around bank reconciliation, right? I still go into sites where, new sites to us where we're picking up support and people are still manually doing bank recs. And I've seen it from the extreme of doing it on paper and highlighting. People still do that. And if you're doing it, don't worry, I'm not going to put you on the spot and make you acknowledge it in the chat. But it still happens. To the next extreme, which in the next scenario up is they're doing the bank rec in Excel, right? So it's not on paper and it's not using a highlighter, but it's in Excel. So they're trying to match it there. And then the next stage up is that they're doing it in the system, but it's not got any automation or automated matching. And then what we're aiming for is it's automatically downloading from the bank and it's automatically matching wherever possible. Okay. And, a lot of systems, certainly the more mature systems, sort of the mid-market systems, will have automations around bank matching rules and things like that. So it's worth exploring those kind of elements. All right. So first thing is bank feeds. Second piece is payment runs. So I see a lot of organizations not having a stopper on their invoices before it goes into a payment run, which means that they triple check everything before it goes onto a payment run, and they manually normally export the age creditors, highlights whether that's in Excel or on a piece of paper, which ones they're going to pay, send that to somebody, and they go yes, and then they manually go through and make the payment on the bank, because they manually dial into the bank, pay those invoices, and then manually go onto the system and enter the payments. Right, there are quite a few things wrong with that process. So firstly, the lack of controls. Two, a lot of the handling of each step of the process. And three, the danger for things to go wrong in that supplier bank details not being right, of the fact that numbers could be typed into a system wrong. There's just so many issues. So one of the things to look at is how should you be processing payment runs in the system. So there is very often an ability to just select the invoices you want to put into a payment run, and either select them, send them off for an authorization, or select them and generate both the bank file and the remittance, and generate the payment itself. Okay, and remittance is something I haven't mentioned yet, but they actually can stop a lot of inquiries, because especially if you do like 3-day payment runs, or you prep your payment run in advance, you might get suppliers going, well, when are you going to pay me? So it just removes those inquiries and those emails. Okay, so that's one good system to look at, and it's very often in most systems we have that capability within there. Okay, to varying degrees depending on whether you're looking at what level you're looking at. If you're a small business system, you may not have them. And I'm talking like the 0 stage 50s, you're going to have less functionality than you have in the more mid-market to enterprise level products, but you should have some. Purchase orders. So pretty much most systems have a purchase order capability. A lot of people are still doing either paper or Excel based purchase orders, or they have absolutely no purchase orders whatsoever. And that causes so many issues, one in terms of visibility, two in terms of authorizations and approvals, and getting visibility of your committed costs is really, really important. And I remember speaking to somebody that had actually been in a situation where they were literally coming so close to month end, or about to submit their accounts, and this massive invoice came in that nobody had knew about or accrued for. Okay. And it really put them on the back foot. So purchase orders are something that businesses should be looking at, particularly if they do a lot of that, a lot of purchasing. And if you have suppliers that are really bad at sending invoices, it's even more important. Okay, so we're looking at purchase orders, and then you can think about how you document that, all those kind of things. But fundamentally, you need them recorded. Setting up items or products. Okay, so a lot of businesses, especially those that are not in stock-based businesses, will not pre-set up products in the system, and that's challenging, because it means that people are manually typing in a lot of information. So if you set up products within your system, or items or stock items, you can very often set them up as service only. And you can set them up with pre-built descriptions. You can default nominal code, so it minimizes posting errors. You can also pre-populate like required information, and you can even do things like add in an anticipated cost as well. So and pricing, you can set up pricing based on those items. So there's lots of benefits to doing it, and I do see a lot of businesses that don't do that, particularly those that don't hold stock. So for me, thinking about that, it also allows you to do reporting. So that means you can understand profitability by product group, by types of services, by individual service, etc. So your reporting becomes a lot more valuable as well. So for those, certain systems don't have very mature reporting capabilities. So by having those products on the items, you can actually pull reporting out through the ledgers versus having to do it in the nominal, which is really valuable. Okay. Next is reporting generally. Okay. So training your team on the reporting tools in your system and what reporting tool to use for when is really, really important. And for our intact customers that are listening to this, and our 200 customers that are looking at this, we are going to be doing some sessions because it's come up a lot in conversations recently. So we are going to be running some webinars, so look out for those. But what you're looking to make sure people understand is what are the reporting capabilities and how can they customize those reports to suit their requirements. And that Excel audit is a really good way to identify the need for this. Okay, so, but just by investing in understanding your reporting tools, doing some basic reporting training, and giving them a list of reports to work through, you could have some very big impact. And there are lots of different ways to use reporting. You can use inbuilt reporting tools. You can use ODBC links into Excel. You can use, purpose-built BI and analytical tools like Power BI. There's lots of things you can look at, right? But fundamentally, that's probably an area where a lot of systems are weak, or they're really heavily reliant on Excel. And I don't mind Excel when it's automated. Well, I say I don't mind. I understand. I am less concerned about Excel when it's automated, when you've got direct feeds. But if you are manually exporting a TUB and using that to pull reports together, it's probably something you need to address, because that causes so many issues. Next thing on the quick wins to look at, reducing customizing invoice layouts. So a lot of people will either manually select invoices as they go through a process, or as in invoice layouts. So, or they will have lots of different versions depending on the type of invoice it is, etc. So if you just spend some time understanding, like, do you have lots of layouts? Do you have layouts depending on the currency, for instance, or depending on the type of customer, or depending on the type of service you're invoicing? You can very often work with those invoicing templates to automate it, to do like, if the customer has this on their account, then show this set of terms and conditions, for instance. So spending some time automating and reducing the number of different invoice layouts and automating the selection of invoice layouts is normally time well spent, and can free up a lot of time, and also reduce errors as well. Credit control tracking in particular, right? So I'm a big fan of credit control automation. But there's a stage before that is how we are tracking. And I see a lot of credit control teams still exporting an aged debt, putting it into Excel, and manually tracking comments and issues on a spreadsheet, right? So all of the systems that we work with have some form of tracking in them, right? So 50 has communications, 200 has query codes, Intact has chatter or collections. So, you have multiple different levels of tracking in each system. So having a conversation about that in particular and getting your credit control out of Excel is a really good first step. And then you could talk about automation of the actual chasing itself, and that's another conversation to have for another day. So that's something to look at. I've got to repeat there, purchase orders. I'm thinking I'm talking about OCR purchase invoices, knowing me. So a lot of systems will either have inbuilt or integrations with OCR platforms to streamline purchase invoice entry, and then adding in things like authorizations of those. Expenses. This is one of the areas where I think it's well worth investing, because again, it will appear in your spreadsheet audit very often. So investing in expenses software, either within your system, if your system has it, so that's the first question to ask, or a purpose-built expense-based system. And there's lots of reasons to do this. So firstly, it means less time for your team in terms of processing the spreadsheets that you're getting sent. The second piece is that if you make it easy for individuals to enter expenses, you are more likely to get them, and more likely to get them quickly, right? So this is why I'm personally a fan of having purpose-built expense apps versus manual spreadsheets, or in software expenses systems, because they tend to be less automated and less powerful than a pre-built expense software. And they'll have other things like policy enforcement, things like limiting how much they can spend on hotels and subsistence and things, authorizations, all those kind of things. So there are lots of reasons to evaluate it, and very often their pricing is designed so that you only pay if people submit, which in some instances can make it quite cheap to implement. So well worth a conversation, well worth looking at. And data quality. So I still see, when I go into sites that have been using systems for a while, I see a lot of people storing data outside in Excel sheets, rather than in the system. Looking at the quality of the data that you're putting into the system, the fields you're storing, opening up analysis codes, or making sure that you put in their credit terms, or whether there are their credit check status, all those kind of things, is really important, because it makes your reporting you're so much more powerful if that data is. And you need to look at it from end to end. So don't be obsessed with finance holding data, right? Welcome people keeping that data updated, like sales teams, making sure their accounts are updated and getting visibility of contact information and things like that. And yeah, so don't be wrong, that there's a lot in that about integration, and which is we'll talk about in a second. But that's a topic I've already talked about for our next Financial Transformation Live. But this, it's just thinking about the quality of the data that you're holding, and identifying issues. Even build a register. Like when you hit issues with your data, maybe the industry isn't populated, so you can't get industry reporting, like profitability by industry and things like that. So just understanding the quality of your data, where the issues come from, and doing some changes that can improve your reporting quite dramatically, for those that haven't spent time and reviewed it on a regular basis. Okay, so 10 quick wings, and I'm very aware I'm rapidly running out of time, but I'm so hoping that was useful. Love to hear your feedback. Again, you can DM me, put it in the chat. It's been very quiet on the chat, so I'm hoping people are listening and taking this stuff on board. So the next question is, should we be moving systems, or should we be working on our existing systems, right? There's lots of things that come into this, right? Budget obviously has a massive impact. The economic climate and what people are doing will have an impact. The growth plans of the business will have an impact. But fundamentally, one of the things that I always think it's really important for people to do is actually do an assessment. So, and again, this is why I say, before you do huge amounts of changes and start spending money on improving your systems, take the opportunity to step back and go, is this the right system? Can it deliver what we need as a finance team? And so sitting down, so this is a very basic traffic light system, and it does work surprisingly well. So if you list out the functional areas within your system, and highlight where they are now. So, and you can use red, yellow, green is probably the simplest. You could do variants of that. Yeah, you could do, yellow with a I if it requires investment, for instance. And what you're looking for is to understand is that if we spent this money on this system, is it going to deliver everything that we need, or is it just going to partially meet expectations? Okay. And what you're looking to understand is the pattern across, right? Because if you can turn everything to green apart from one thing that goes yellow, then actually it may be that you should stick with your existing system, right? If, however, you review that system and like this one, there's one green but everything else is yellow, and it's not really that automated, and it's all right, but it's not going to be great, then it's worth going out and evaluating systems and alternative solutions. Obviously, if you have no budget, then don't do this, because it can. You should probably do this and then understand whether you need to make budget available. But you might just say, right, we're at a level where we can't afford to pay for a really shiny, fancy new system. So we need to make the best of what we've got. And then that's where those in process improvements, and you're going to have to invest manpower in making that work really well. And potentially add-ons to extend the life of your current system. But longer term, when you're thinking about the growth plans of the business, if they're super ambitious, then you need to be realistic and have a conversation with the executive to say, actually, our systems are just about getting by. I've got some short-term improvements that can give us an extra 12 to 18 months of runway in our existing system, but I am going to need the budget if you want to hit these kind of numbers, these kind of volumes, to actually shift system, because I cannot do that without investing in, firstly, massive load of staff, but also, the system will not be suited for the level of controls that we're going to need for that kind of growth. Okay. So there's lots of conversations. And if you want to, again, If you want to have any of those kind of conversations, you feel like you could do with some advice on that sort of, are we where we need to be? And I think that's why best practice is really good, because if you go out and you research best practice and you go, fundamentally, that's what I need, but the current system can't deliver it, then if there is a conversation. But if it's only one element, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is often, and I'd say in probably 95% of cases, we can make some dramatic improvements to existing systems with some investment, either or training or some tweaks to the system or some modules and add-ons, right? So there's always a conversation to be had. And a lot of people and a lot of businesses are still using the system in the same way as when they first implemented, which could be 10 years ago. So I think that's why I'm so passionate about having these kind of sessions, to actually spend the time going through and analysing your existing system. How can I make it better? And even if you give yourself an extra 12 months, that just gives you some time to get your house in order and to free up capacity, that if you then need to shift, then you have the time because your team have capacity, right? And you need to think about resourcing this kind of change, because this is a transformation project, right? Today's has been about how do we assess what needs to be done, how do we identify solutions, but fundamentally actually implementing those changes is a transformation project. So if you haven't watched our session around planning and implementing change, and I might do another one on that one actually, because I've had a few questions and queries and feedback on that, so I will do some more on that, then it's well worth it, okay? Okay, so today's session, we covered a framework for reviewing your current systems. So we talked about doing, getting independent feedback. We talked about collating, identifying trends. We talked about doing process reviews, month-end timeline, Excel mapping, getting identification of best practice, consulting with technical consultants, and then documenting and presenting and summarizing your findings. We talked about common quick wins for system improvements. They were system agnostic. I'm hoping you guys find I did give you some system specific examples, but again, I'm hoping they're useful. I'm hoping they're adding value, and it can be very similar across different similar levels of systems. I've talked you through how you can do a quick view of whether you should invest in improving your current system versus switching to a new one, and some things to think about. And hopefully I've also shared a shed load of useful content and templates and resources. If I have missed anything, then just let me know, right? I'm quite active on LinkedIn. Yeah, I'll share lots of content, but I get lots of messages. And if I can help, I will. Like, even if I point you in a different direction, I will always do my very best. And sometimes we can't help. We are a financial transformation consultancy that specializes in Sage technology. And the reason we're good at it is that that's what we do day in, day out, right? So I'm not an expert in other technologies that are on the market, but very often I will know someone there. So if I can point you in the right direction, I will. If not, I'll just tell you some things to think about, and hopefully it'll set you on the right track. So talking of which, if you have follow-up questions and you want to reach out and have a conversation, maybe just want some free advice, and as long as it's not going to take me like days to answer an email and give you advice, then I will. I'm always happy to point people in the right direction. My contact details are there. DM me on LinkedIn is probably the best place to get hold of me. If you want to send through specific questions or scenarios, please do, right? Because I use it as fodder for these conversations that I'm having. If you've got any topics that you think I should cover, small or big, just send them through. Please, I love inspiration. It helps me build out what we're doing here. And any feedback on these sessions, good or bad, constructive criticism, always welcome, then please do, because it does help me shape what content we produce. If you think I'm not structuring the sessions in the most productive format, then let me know. I am also looking for people that are on, that would be willing to do sort of a mini system review session in exchange for sharing the recording, because a lot of stuff I talk about is I like to think it's quite practical, but there is nothing like seeing someone go through that process to really bring it to life. So whether that's doing an Excel audit, whether that's doing a month end, or doing one of these system reviews, if anyone is open to being a public guinea pig, is probably the wrong expression, but is willing to share their experience in return for getting a free consultancy session that we can record and share online, then I'm more than happy to offer up my time to do that, because I think it would just help people understand how to approach. Okay, so the next session, we're going to talk about integration. So I've been involved in a lot of conversations recently about how people can integrate their systems. So I'm going to talk through the why. I'm going to talk through some of the benefits, because very often finance systems can sit in silo, and we really need to step away from that. As a finance operators and as finance leaders, we need to get to a point where our systems are being fed from others. So I want to spend some time talking about the why. I'm also going to talk about the options. So I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of different options. So, things like, do you go point to point, which is API to API? What is an API? Talking about middleware, pros and cons of that approach, loads of different things. Okay, so we're going to talk the why, options, and also planning your integrations. What does a good integration project look like? How do you structure it? And we'll pick that up in the next session. A slightly different time is the 25th of October, which is a Tuesday, but at 1 p.m. Okay, so if you have questions for that session, send them through to me. I will add them to the agenda. If there's weird and wonderful terms that you've heard when you've been looking at integrations options and you want me to explain them, send them through. And if there's things that you particularly want to get out of that session, just send it to me. Okay, so again, don't worry, I'm not going to chase you down and say you didn't attend that session, but at least you'll be able to access the recording after it. And Soph will hopefully put that link to the next session into the chat as well, so that you guys can join. If you can't find it, because we did share a lot of links today, you can go onto our website, go on to www.itesolutions.co.uk, click on resources, and sign up via either the podcast page or the financial transformation page. You can DM me, or you can follow us on LinkedIn. So we have a fairly active LinkedIn page where we share this kind of content, and we set up the events there. So you can go onto our page, follow us, and then you can should be able to find the events section, and you can sign up to that event there as well. So lots of different ways. I probably should be trying to keep it simple, but I'm really hoping you found this session useful. So some major content, some research. Just a reminder to everybody, we've got those 3 previous financial transformation live sessions: reducing your month end close, breaking the Excel addition, and this one is the re-engineering. So just remembering, we've got both the getting started with process mapping and also the process re-engineering session. Again, both good watches, or at least I think they are, but useful for those that are going through that transformation piece. And I've actually had some BAs comments, and and have some comments from those that have actually watched and used this stuff. So really hope it's useful. If you think I've missed anything though, guys, just reach out. So thank you. It's been lovely. I've gone over time, but I'm hoping it's been a valuable session. Thank you to everybody that's listened and watched. For those of you that are listening onto the podcast after the fact, please remember that you can always access the slides in the show notes, and also all of the content in the show notes as well, or on our website. So thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. And if you want to access any of our quizzes, any of our content, if anything on this session I've somehow missed a link, then let us know. But it's been a pleasure as usual. So take care of yourselves, guys, and I'll see you at the next one.